My name is Tom. I was involved in an accident here in the Villages, Florida, a bicycling accident. It occurred back in the year before this past one, 1919, February 28th, I believe, was the date. And I was crossing an intersection and a truck was coming straight at me and apparently did not see me. And the last thing I remember before being hit by the truck was the driver was looking off to his right, not paying attention to where he was going. As soon as I realized that, I sped up. Luckily, he just caught the back of my bike. It would have been much worse. The accident would have been much worse had I not sped up a little bit. But I was still knocked off my bicycle. I don't remember what happened after I was hit. I was knocked unconscious, and I was taken to a trauma center where I was later released that day. I did have quite a bit of pain. I was sore all over. It was later decided that I had a concussion, and it took me a while to get back where I wanted to be. After the crash, I realized I needed a lawyer, so I turned to Jim Dodson Law, because I knew that Jim was a bicyclist himself. He was very involved in cases that involved bicycling accidents, and he had spoken before at some of our club meetings at the Lake Sumter Village Landing bicycle club meetings that we have every month. And I'd received his newsletter, etc., and I realized this was the person I should speak to. Contacted Jim Dodson Law, and everything went very smoothly right from the outset, right from the beginning. Jim was very attentive. He collected a lot of information. My wife also interceded in terms of realizing that I was not feeling well, and she helped quite a bit too, and she conversed with Jim also, and it went very well. And the entire time I talked to Jim and worked with him, he was, as I said, very attentive. He asked a lot of questions. He gathered a lot of information. He kept me abreast of what was going on at every point in time during this period of time after the accident when I was working with him. So I was very happy the way the whole thing shook out in terms of what happened during that period of time. Well, we worked with attorneys on the usual things that families work with attorneys on, things like estate planning, wills, things of this nature. But I'd never worked with an attorney before, like Jim, regarding an accident. So this was something entirely new for me, and I didn't know really what to expect. I was very pleased that Jim was very personable, and he seemed very concerned, and he right from the get-go, he just was with me in terms of where I was, and kept me, as I said, abreast of what was going to be happening. And I got frequent phone calls and emails from Jim and his staff, and it was very helpful to know that they were right there. I didn't have to prod. I didn't have to call and find out what was going on, where we were. If I had any questions at all about how the case was progressing, I called him, and he got back to me immediately and told me where we were at that point in time and what to expect. I think if there was one moment that stood out, it was after several months of going through this and wondering where this was going, not really knowing. And Jim told me he thought this might be a good strategy to use toward the end of this whole ordeal, and that this is what I could expect in terms of the time frame remuneration, etc. So that was probably the one point. Everything had been very positive up to that point, but that kind of almost finalized things. And I said, wow, it's been well worth this working with Jim Dodson. Exceed my expectations. I knew that Jim had experience working on cases like this that involved bicycling accidents, him being, a cyclist himself. But I guess I just was very impressed with the fact that even though I'm sure he is extremely busy, he gave me his undivided attention at all times when he called me or when I called him. It was the most all-important thing to him to get this case resolved, and I just felt at all times that it was never an imposition to call on my part and ask questions. And he kept me abreast. If we didn't know what was going to happen, he would tell me, and he would say, I'll know by a certain date probably this should happen. We'll know by then what to expect. And he wasn't misleading in any way. I mean, he was just upfront with me, and was very, very honest about everything. And I guess more than anything else, just the openness, the honesty, the concern, all these things were factors that made me very comfortable working with him, and very happy that things turned out the way they did, and happy that I chose him to be my lawyer for this particular accident. If I had to describe Jim Dodson in 3 words, those 3 words would probably be concerned, attentive, and probably honest. I guess those would be the 3. I'm sure I can come up with other superlatives, other things that would describe him, but those would be probably the three that kind of stood out. A friend that was involved in a cycling accident, much like mine, I would definitely recommend Jim Dodson as this person's lawyer, because I think Jim was very concerned. He was, as I said, attentive. He very personal, very easy to work with, and another thing that impressed me about him was he collected a lot of information, which I thought was very important. He left no stone unturned. He wanted to know as much as possible about the accident, how it occurred, how I was feeling afterwards, that sort of thing. I guess he was right on top of things, and he I can't say enough good things about the way he handled the whole thing. And I would highly recommend him to anyone that wanted a lawyer in a bicycling accident like mine. Well, I think it was important that there was somebody that I knew that was a cyclist and as a lawyer handled this type of case, because I wanted somebody that had experience dealing with this sort of thing and had the ability, I guess, to identify with me as a cyclist. And there are a lot of advertisements that I see on television and in the newspapers that have these outrageous claims, and I don't know what these people. I don't think I've ever seen one that's involved a cyclist, and it was important for me to find somebody, first of all, that had some experience with this type of case, being an accident on a bicycle. I thought that that would be very, very important, and I wasn't sure at the time who else I would turn to, and I just made the decision very, very easy for me that I would turn to somebody that specialized in this type of case, and he could identify with me being a cyclist as well. I do feel that I'm back to where I should be and have been for quite some time. And I think Jim was very, very concerned about this as well. I think he took an interest not just in making sure that that there would be remuneration, but to make sure that also that I would be healthy again and able to bicycle and live a normal life. And he asked a lot of personal questions, which I think were important to ask. It wasn't just all business, all numbers. It was a personal interest he took in my own situation, and I think that was important, and it really I think made me confident of the fact I'd made the right choice in choosing him for my lawyer, my attorney in this case. I feel that Jim Dodson did the best for me that he could in this case, and I think the fact that we didn't rush this thing through, we waited, we're patient, and the remuneration was more than I expected, and I was very, very happy with the outcome of this whole ordeal that I had to endure for several months. And I'm very happy that I chose Jim Dodson Law, and I don't have any regrets whatsoever. And should something like this happen again, he would be the first and only person that I would turn to.